help our teams effectively balance strategic work with tactical work. And this is a preamble as we lead up into our Executive Symposium on August 15, 2024 in Austin, Texas, in downtown Austin, Texas. We're actually hosting it at a really cool high-end furniture store called Blue Dot. But we bring these executive symposiums together to bring leaders together to discuss different leadership topics. For this topic today, how to help our employees effectively balance strategic work with tactical work. We've got three great leaders who are going to be at the executive symposium here with us today to discuss this topic. We've got Elizabeth, we've got Greg, we've got Marissa. Do y'all mind just introducing yourselves? Marissa, do you mind going first?
Sure, of course. Great to see everybody. My name is Marissa Barcza. I live here in Austin, Texas. Looking forward to the event next month. I currently run our sales, marketing, and customer success team as a VP at FluentStream. We provide voice over internet phone service to small to medium-sized businesses across America. I started my career in consulting and did that for nearly 10 years and then pivoted into technology, starting in success and then kind of expanding my scope from there. Really excited to talk about this topic.
Very cool. Greg, how about you?
Yes, of course, Greg Janecek. I'm with Amazon Web Services, and I manage the relationship between AWS and Zoom Video Communications. Been doing in that role for about 3 years. Been in tech my entire career, and have been involved in quite a few startups, including AWS back in 2006, Twilio shortly after, 5 years after that, and then a couple other things before coming back to Amazon Web Services. And I'm in Austin as well.
Very cool. And Elizabeth, how about you?
Yeah, I am a sales leader currently on sabbatical based in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I've been in fintech for 15 years. Lots of different roles like Marissa and Greg both, from customer success, sales leadership, partnerships. And prior to my venture into tech, I was an accountant for Whole Foods Market, which is Austin based. So.
Very cool. And I'm Garrett Mintz. I'm the founder of Ambition in Motion. At Ambition in Motion, our vision is a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they are there, their expectations meet reality. And when they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe that starts with leaders, because leaders create the experiences employees have while at work. And so we create technologies and communities to empower leaders to be their best selves for their teams. And one of the ways that we build community is through executive symposiums. So let's dive into our topic. How to help employees effectively balance strategic work with tactical work. So one thing that I often see a lot of leaders challenged with is going about, one, identifying a priority list, but also proper incentives to get their team to most effectively deploy their time. So then they're doing it, they're being as productive as they possibly can be. Sometimes I'll see one side of the spectrum where you've got some team members that are like, hey, boss, just did the thing that you asked me to do. What's next on my plate? And you're like, hey, we laid out a strategic vision. I need you to maybe infer a little bit what your next task should be without having me be the order giver of what you need to work on next. On the flip side, sometimes you'll see scenarios where someone's like, hey, I'm ready to run with the Bulls. Put me in, coach. I'm ready for the next step to do some strategic thinking. You're like, love the enthusiasm, but I need the tactical work that you're currently responsible for still to get done. So we can't just drop all these things that you're currently bored with because you think you're over it. We still need that work to get done. And so it's like, how do we find that right balance between strategic work with tactical work and keeping people excited while at the same time getting the work done and acknowledging that certain positions require or can allow for more strategic work, while certain positions are pretty tactical and just kind of need you to grind it out and get the work done. And so how do y'all go about keeping people excited and motivated when maybe they're ready to jump to the next level. They think they're ready to jump to the next level, but you still need them in that position. And I'll come back to the flip side too of like, how do you go about keeping people thinking about the next steps if they're very tactically focused? But let's start with I'm an eager beaver. I'm ready to jump to the next level, but the work still needs to get done. How do you go about tempering expectations without putting out their light, if that makes any sense? Who wants to go first?
I can kick it off. So I have been very fortunate in my career, especially as of late as a leader, where I'm brought in oftentimes when teams are scaling and really evolving beyond that, up to and beyond the 25 million mark. And so it's been a really great opportunity for me to see a lot of individuals in the scrappy mode and needing to evolve into that strategic mode. And a couple of things that I've done that I think has been helpful for teams is first and foremost, I truly deeply believe in strengths-based leadership as a philosophy, and understanding what your team's strengths are, not only what they're good at, but what gives them energy, I think is really critical here, because as teams are evolving and growing and scaling, there's probably opportunities for everyone's skills to shine. You just have to figure out where the puzzle pieces fit together. And so when you have someone who is very eager to be super strategic, I think it's great to identify that and then find a complementary person on the team, if ideally, if you have a team of more than one, that has that tactical or operational bend to their role that can truly execute well and identify efficiencies in that tactical work. Oftentimes I see people that lean towards tactical often lead towards efficient. And so they can find ways to do work a little bit more quickly than the person that has that strategic bend, who might be thinking up in the clouds, as we like to say, regarding like the broader kind of strategic work that needs to get done. And it might be taking them longer to do the tactical work because that's just not where their strengths lie. So when you find someone that does have that strategic bend, it's always helpful to find a complementary person to not necessarily pick up the slack, but identify ways to work smarter so that everyone can be successful.
Greg, Elizabeth, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think a lot of, especially when you're rolling out change management, which has been most of my career, big strategies, things like that. It starts with clear communication and setting very like specific goals and priorities, and then breaking those down in meaningful bite sizes. So we talk about like product goals, like, okay, what do I need to do to get to my bigger goals? And if you're working with people who have a vision, are quite hungry and ambitious, if you can align some of the tactical and strategic goals to accomplish the company goals and objectives with their personal goals and objectives, I find that that can be extremely motivating for people. Is like give them a chance to shine, give them a chance to tackle little pieces of a bigger goal and celebrate the small milestones as you go throughout the process.
Yeah, I like what Marissa said about finding where people can add success, where they bring the greatest value. I actually, my side job was coaching. I coached for 25 years, thousands of kids, hundreds of teams. And what I found is if you identify where they can add value to the team, no matter what their skill level, there's some place where they can add a lot of value, and you put them in a position to win, they become motivated. And they go from feeling like they've never been, a big factor to a team to feeling like, you know what, I can do this one thing really well, and they get focused on it and they do it even better. So that's, yeah, Marissa, good call out there. Just more broadly, I think it's understanding, everyone has to go through a business plan at some point, whether it's end of the year, beginning of the year. You identify how your initiatives align with your business goals as the whole organization or as the company itself. Then we put in place single-threaded owners, and they build the pod, if you will. So they build, who do I need to deliver this initiative? Do I need technical account management? Do I need customer success, solution architects, go-to-market partner people? And they kind of build the pod, so they own it. In my case, managing Zoom, it's a lot of people on that team. We have quite a few initiatives, and making sure we have clear goals for each of those initiatives with milestones. Those little wins, those milestones we hit also motivate people and, get them behind the next milestone and getting closer to the initiative. So that's, getting that business plan or the initiative plan in place from the get-go is important as well.
I know y'all are, well, so these are all really fantastic points. We'll come back to, especially like this concept of strengths-based leadership and just like putting people on their strengths. So that's something to be a through line, even with like everything of what y'all are saying. But the thing that Marissa, you brought up early on that I find to be particularly fascinating, and I want to touch on this real quick, because I think all of you, to an extent, have experience with this, but this concept of going from scrappy to strategic. I see a lot of challenges happening all the time with a lot of companies where, it was me and my roommate, and we just started, and he was an accounting major, and now he's our CFO, and like, just because he was your roommate in college and was an accounting major doesn't necessarily make him the best CFO in the world. It doesn't. And the company evolves and it needs to evolve. But one thing I think I see a lot of companies do is, I don't want to say someone's like like overgrown their britches or whatever like the concept is, but like they're out of their element. They're not in a position where their competence level does not meet what the company needs from them, yet they're too high up and they lack the objectivity to hear that. How do you go about managing through those kind of growing pains and either getting them to a level where they're competent enough, or having that hard conversation and being able to yeah, I guess manage up in scenarios like that when you're transitioning from scrappy to strategic? Because another thing that you might hear, especially from employees, is like they'll say things like, "You've changed. We used to have 10 different ways to do this one activity, and now we've streamlined it into one way, and everyone has to follow the same process. Oh, I used to have the autonomy to choose how I did this thing, and now you're making me follow this protocol." I'm being silly, but it's a thing that happens in business all the time. How do you go about effectively transitioning that scrappy to strategic mindset?
I mean, I think that's something in life as well. I mean, as we're growing up, we try everything. When we get a job, okay, now this is your one responsibility, get it done, right? So I think that's common. But if you look at a lot of the the creativity that people bring who do startups, it's amazing. Their work ethic, they're passionate about it, and they're going to deliver something. They have a goal, a vision. A lot of those same folks can't carry it in through, round C, round D, and then going public. The board comes in, they start replacing people. Just the way it happens. Maybe they become a CTO or something, but no longer CEO of the company, no longer CFO. They're the visionary, and sometimes they eventually start their own thing. But it's a different. I totally agree. I've done a lot of startups. I'm really comfortable in the startup mode. Operations, I'm not as comfortable in, not as interested in. So this is why I've done a lot of startups. So I think those people will get replaced. I think few of those who start a company will actually get kind of lifted up to continue and run that company. It's just not what they're interested in.
Yeah. I'll jump in. I think something that I've observed is definitely the leadership level kind of needing to evolve and morph, as mentioned, especially in the operations side of the house, which is, bring me in, Coach Greg, next time around. Let me know. I'm around. But I would say that something else that I've had a lot of conversations with more at the junior kind of level of, as their leader, as their manager, et cetera, is really talking to people about what success looks like for them in their career. I often find that I'll put it a different way. I've never met anyone who doesn't want to be successful at their job. And I've never met anyone who is so clueless that when they're in a job that they're not doing well at, that they don't realize it. I'm sure there are people that are not self-aware enough to recognize that. But oftentimes when I've come in, I've worked with people, the roles evolve pretty drastically. They realize they're in a position that maybe doesn't fit their skill sets as well as the previous one had, or the previous kind of iteration of that role was. And working with the person, not the employee, is really important at that time. Really, again, I know I keep saying it, but that strengths-based leadership is key. I think oftentimes I've worked with people who, especially in the startup world, they maybe have never had that conversation. They've never really assessed, where are my strengths? Where do they lie? What brings me energy when I get up in the morning? And while it had been going to work, being barefoot and having the keg tapped at 3, playing ping pong, now we're not really doing that. We're remote. We're working in a very different environment. Go find what brings you joy. And maybe it's not here, and that's okay. I am always there to support people in their success, because everyone wants to be successful. And I don't know, at a future time, maybe they'll be looking for someone like me, or I'll be looking for someone like them. It just isn't right here, right now. And I've oftentimes been able to successfully help, again, extending my network, helping people find what will be the right place for them, even if the job that they've had for the last 2, 3, 5 years is no longer that. So just orienting around the person is so key, so that they can feel supported despite the fact that they're maybe floundering in a role that's changed over time.
Well, that's in that note, and in that notion, in that vein, how do we overcome the ego element of it? Because I think I mean, acknowledge in a perfectly perfect world, people are self-aware that they're not doing necessarily the best job at what they're doing. also when there's organizational hierarchy and this person is above us in the organizational hierarchy and everyone keeps fanning them with praise because they're our boss and we don't want to get fired, it can be hard for us to have that conversation with them. How do you go about keeping them focused on exactly what either needs to be done or what they need to do to get to the next level? And within that vein, I guess this leads to a question related to what Elizabeth said earlier about aligning goals and making sure that whenever we're doing any change initiative, that goals are aligned. Sometimes what I'll observe is a visionary, excited, pie in the sky CEO that says something along the lines of, it'd be really awesome if we could do X. Or what'd be really cool is if we did Y. And not give any clarity to anybody on the team as to when this is going to be done, if this is a high priority, what are we thinking about, like what this rollout could look like, zero priority, and then just leaves it. And then the team is left to decipher, like, okay, am I making this my number one priority? Like, is this the new goal? Do I just kind of forget that this person just said this? So I guess I think within that vein of like maybe a CEO transitioning from scrappy to strategic is also the clarity of communication of, is what I'm communicating clear, specific, and effective for what my team needs to do moving forward? And how do we go about creating an environment where we get that clarity?
I think where it comes down to is like having that openness and radical candor, and having trust, especially at the executive level, to have those conversations where it's not in front of everyone, but maybe you have a small group and you have some tough conversations about, okay, where is this on the priority list? What are the timelines? It can be taking the reins and making sure everything written down and documented and like scenario planned out, for what does this look like? What are the different situations, like, fast growth, medium growth, slow growth for this direction, and working out those plans can be really helpful. But where I find that, best fit again is in just having that openness and trust on an executive team so you can really hash out these things. And then sometimes if you're talking about like a visionary CEO, if you want to keep that person at the helm as you're growing, it could be a chance where you need to bring in a COO. Just like Marissa was saying, you need to bring in someone who's more operational, more tactical, who's going to be kind of on level with the CEO to help fill in those gaps as you're going from that 25 million to that 100 million, 250 million, or 10 million, so on and so forth. So.
Marissa, Greg, any thoughts on that? On how to, I don't know, rein in the communication and keep goals strategic and clear?
Yeah, go back to the planning at the end of the beginning of the year. It's critical. I think we all do it, or most of us do it, right? You do that operating plan. Maybe some advanced companies, they do operating plan 2 mid-year just to course correct. But coming out of that, it's really important to have, the business drivers are top down, right? The board wants to do X, the C-level wants to do Y, and those come top down. Then the VPs have to decide, okay, how do we get there? What initiatives do we have to put in place, and how do I deliver on those initiatives? We build those plans. We define the initiatives to support the business drivers for the organization. And then we put the leadership in place on our team to deliver that, who owns it, right? So it's really important to everything, from priorities perspective, goes back to what's going to drive us meeting those initiatives. And we have to keep our eyes, and we're probably all really bad at this. Okay, we got the business plan in place. Great. Let me put it on the shelf and go to work. Then you start the tactical stuff, right? So you have to ask yourself, how is this going to move the needle for our initiatives? And if it is, it's got to be a priority, especially dates are coming that you don't want anything to slip. If it's not going to move the needle, then it gets deprioritized, and it's got to be, done at a different time when you have availability, or if you have to work the weekend, whatever the case is.
Yeah, strong agree.
What's interesting though is this concept of like experimentation within all of this, because I think the thing that, what we're saying is like, cool, we lay out this vision, great, amazing, we're all excited, we're all on board, and then tactically we have to go out and execute. But I don't think as leaders we do a good enough job of is conveying to everybody else on the team that this is an experiment. Like, we think you behaving in this way, and if you achieve X results, that Y will happen, that this ball will fall if you do these sorts of things. Sometimes there's scenarios where that experiment just doesn't work. And it's like, hey, it just, darn it, you did everything you were supposed to do. You did everything we asked you to do. We thought if you did X, Y would happen. Unfortunately, shucks, it didn't happen, and we're back to the drawing board. But that can be really hard for other people to hear because they spent so much time, energy, and effort perfecting this thing that you told them you wanted them to perfect. And so how do you go about conveying proper expectations to your team that this is an experiment and what that timeline looks like? If what does success look like? What does failure look like from this experiment? What is our evaluation period? And, are we going to double down and keep moving forward, or are we going to try something else just so then your team knows, like, okay, cool, like, I'm going to put in my full force effort in this, but if God forbid we pull the plug, I'm not going to be totally shocked that we're pulling the plug because the subsequent results weren't able to hit the way we wanted them to hit. Yeah, jump in, Elizabeth.
Yeah, this is like, it feels very close to my heart because last year I worked on a project where we changed our go-to-market motion. We became very partner forward. And it was exactly that. It was like, hey, we're changing the way we go to market. We're putting in this whole plan. It's an experiment. We're taking best of breed from the market, but this is new for our business. We're going to have to be very agile. We're going to have to be very flexible. It's going to take like weekly check-ins and progress. And this is the timelines we expect to see this amount of success. And like, Greg's been talking about having the business plans rolled out for, 6 months, 9 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, and keeping the checkpoints on that. And again, it was like that regular communication with the team is like, we're going to give it a try. And we'll come back and do feedback sessions. It was like every 2 weeks we'd do feedback sessions, what's working, what's not working. We do it weekly actually, but like a serious like deep dive where we'd sit an hour and a half together, review notes. We had Gong, which is a call recorder. There's others out there. Huge fan of that. We would like listen to like trying different pitches together and like break it down and be like, how can we fine tune this? And like just the vulnerability, again, like I'm a huge component of vulnerability as a leader, was massive for the team, and just like getting everyone to buy in to their little piece and how we're all working together. And it was like giving people the freedom to fail fast, pivot, communicate, and like, let's just fine tune this thing and get it as good as we can.
Yeah. Feedback, very important. Yeah, I think you touched on it well. How often do we give ourselves time to get that feedback? I mean, analogy, autonomous driving, right? That car has feedback constantly in thousands of data points per second, right? We can't do that in our jobs, of course, but the more feedback we can get, the better we can course correct. And it's not a big right turn, it's just a slight curve every week. It is a better way to do it.
Yeah. Something else that I've leaned into a lot that I think helps with this scenario of experimentation, and then also a bit with the like business leader type activities, is just really leaning on storytelling. And again, maybe this is coming from my like operational kind of world where I'm in the weeds a lot of what's going on in the business, but connecting the dots back to leadership and to your team. So when you're doing an experiment, explaining to the team why we're doing this experiment, what the hopes are, and not having it tied exclusively to that lagging indicator. So your example of like, Elizabeth, with your like changing the go-to-market motion, the goal is to increase sales, I would assume, right? Like it's probably what your goal is. But what are the leading indicators that'll get your team rallied and excited? And how can you make those the incentives that they're trying to hit so that they can be excited about it? And then when you see wins or see big misses, how do you tell that story to leadership in a way that gets them excited and like happy with the progress, even if you aren't hitting the goal in the way that was expected? Or if you're hitting a different goal that was unexpected, but really meaningful. And I think too often we get, especially as leaders, we get so focused on these like big OKR, huge goals, very lagging indicators that are super critical, but there's so many stones on that path to success that maybe we need to also address and identify like how they lead to success in a different or unexpected way. And storytelling is so key there, because as you continue to tell that story, leadership can better address and understand the day-to-day of your teams and the day-to-day of your function, so that they keep that in mind subconsciously, even as they're making new goals or saying, hey, what if we, because every leader loves to say, hey, what if we, and but maybe they'll have in mind, like, I know you're doing all these other things, how would this fit in to that kaleidoscope of activities?
Yeah, I like that. The analogy that I keep thinking about in my head, well, let me start with this. I think a lot of leaders won't convey that this new way of behaving is an experiment because of fear of lack of commitment to the action or activity itself. I think a lot of leaders fear like, oh, if I say it's an experiment, that might convey temporary or like not fully committed to this new plan of action. It's almost like you're going whitewater rafting, and the moment you face a little adversity on the rapids, you jump right into the raft. Well, you could get caught on a rock. If you get caught on a rock, you need someone to be paddling to get you off the rock and through the river and down the river. And so I think if we as leaders can convey, hey, you may face adversity in this new behavior change. This might be a little bit different from the way that you've been behaving. And the outcomes, maybe we could say, we think that this will work based on our logic and assumption is that if X happens, Y will subsequently happen. And that will help our business drive forward and everything will move from there positively. But we could get down to the end of this road and end up realizing, oh my gosh, our assumption was wrong. We're going to try something new. I think that vulnerability and transparency around the experiment will get people more patient and give you the leader more grace as you make adjustments to that strategy and to that plan if changes need to be made, versus saying, they changed my behavior. They asked me to do it this way 3 months ago, and now they're asking me to do it this different way now, and it's so frustrating. I don't even know what to commit to. I think a lot of people can feel more, I guess, ingratiated in the decision making if they understand that this is an experiment and why the decision is being made and what metrics they're looking at for success. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've seen it. I guess I've seen it a lot with younger leaders not being secure enough in their experience to have that vulnerability and clarity of like, hey, we don't know all of the answers. I see that a lot. Where I think once you have some more experience and you've taken more hits and gone more rounds, like not every punch is going to land, right? Like you've got to get out there and give some things a try. So I mean, that's it. But what I have witnessed and what I have experienced both as, from leadership and being a leader is when you do have that vulnerability, like just like you said, and you set the tone of like, hey, we're going to give this a try. We think it's 80-90%. And we're going to have to make some adjustments as we go. You're on this ride with us. We're all in this together. And we want you to be a part of it and have that active feedback and get the buy-in from the team and like make sure that you're doing those feedback loops and the communication. I found that it's really empowering to your people to let them participate in the change, and have a say in it and just say like, hey, let's give this a try for 3 weeks and see what happens. Or however, whatever the period of time it's going to be. Like, let's give it, everyone try this, a few times, a couple of pitches, whatever it is. And then we're going to come back together and talk about what worked, what didn't work, how we think we should fine tune it.
Yeah, I'd expand on that just a little bit. Maybe not 100% agree, but I think it needs to be the this or that, whatever's changing, really needs to be the team's decision, right? When we're doing an operating plan, it's not I'm writing it and then handing it out to everyone to review. It's we're iterating on it. And it could be a 6-week, a lot of work process with several meetings a week, iterating over and over. I saw just a simple 1-pager that took 14 iterations a couple weeks ago. Everyone who has to touch it, who has to be involved in making it successful, so that when we finally deliver our plan, everyone's bought in. And frankly, if someone's not bought in, they may be put on a different project because you got 10 people bought in, one's not, and we've got either disagree and commit, or you disagree and move on to a different project. right?
Well, Greg, I want to ask a pushback question on that. How do you go about avoiding groupthink in that sort of situation? Because even with what you're describing right there is like, hey, if you're not on board with this one pager, you can get off the boat. It's like, what if you're someone who's like, I think this other one pager could be better. Could we A/B test it and see like which ones close more deals or get us the end outcome that we're trying to achieve? I guess like how do you go about getting that sort of do you do that sort of experimentation when it comes to getting consensus, or is it just like everybody inputs their input? And then the question on that is how do we avoid decision fatigue and
Sure.
literally spending a whole year trying to finish a one pager?
Yeah, well, we're giving
14 people need to be involved.
Yeah, we're given a timeline, so we know what
Okay.
time we have to hit. We will be presenting this up to our VP leadership at some point. So that kind of gives us the time boundaries, right? After that, there's a lot of these initiatives are complex, right? There's a product component, there's a go-to-market component, sales component, marketing component. There's a technical component. What problem is this solving? And then there's a value component. What's the financial value of this? So typically that plan, it's called the operation plan, is divided up into different sections, right? And you have a person leading each section. So when we have a review, everyone's reviewing your section, and their job is to shoot holes in it. And if they don't, it's kind of like this conference, this call, like if no one disagrees with anything, what's the point, right? So, and they will shoot holes in it. And sometimes they're very accurate. Sometimes those holes are, well, you're kind of missing the ultimate goal. So we have to, then we made a mistake in not clarifying what our ultimate outcomes need to be, right? So it's a iterative process with ownership for each of those components of it that make the end solution hopefully successful. So there's a lot of buy-in along the way. Typically with the hard work everyone puts into it, it's almost like I am tired of you have to be careful. I'm tired of this. I just want this thing blessed. I'm not going to argue anymore, but it goes through a lot of iterations before that happens.
Well, I was about to say, does somebody have responsibility for the end decision in that? Like, I'm just thinking, I don't know. I think back to the early days of Uber.
Yeah.
There had to have been someone in the room who was like, what if people just start raping and killing each other when they enter into a stranger's vehicle because they ordered a ride with this stranger? This is a certified taxi with the medallion and stuff like that. And people were worried that people would just behave like barbarians entering in someone else's car. And obviously someone was like, no one's gonna be raping and killing each other, entering into a stranger's vehicle, going from point A to point B, and they pushed it through. But there was definitely, I remember some people, some like critics of Uber, like, oh, well, I would never enter into a stranger's car. Now it's, everybody uses Uber now. But I guess, like, how do you avoid the naysayer holding back? How do you have someone who just essentially just says, we're pushing forward on this. This is the decision we're going with. Like, how do you go about determining who's the main responsible person?
Yeah, I'd say there's not a main responsible person. That naysayer brought up a concern, a security concern. Sure. Someone had to our one pager may have 10 pages of appendix, right? Which is data and metrics and everything else. So, how do you vet the person entering the vehicle? How do you vet the driver so it doesn't go the other way, right? You have to, there are some security things put in place to support that. Who the customer is, their name, their address, their credit card number, their phone number, right? So there's some validation this person isn't just let out of jail, a week ago. Sure. All right. Same with the drivers. They were vetted strongly. Living in Austin, they pushed back on the vetting process by Uber quite a bit, and they wanted it vetted even more, right? So every naysayer creates a concern that has to be dealt with. And if you can't deal with it, then you're taking a risk. Then it goes to risk, and risk says, I'm not taking this risk. I'm not responsible for this liability. You guys go back and come up with a different solution. I think naysayers are a good thing.
I mean, I would agree. I agree that naysayer is a good thing, but I would say where I disagree is I think there should be one main person responsible for the end decision being made, or decision fatigue, I think, may proliferate, and it can be hard for anything to move forward because like there's never going to be perfect consensus on any one step that you end up pursuing.
Yeah.
And I think like if not one person's got the major voice in the room to say like, hey, we're going in this direction, you kind of sit in you sit in the middle of nowhere just trying to determine what to do next.
Yeah.
Well, not to take too much time, but one last thing. We have a mechanism to say, okay, we're stuck, right? We have different views of this. Then we go back to, okay, is this a one-way decision or two-way decision? Meaning, can we make this decision and reverse out of it pretty quickly without a lot of pain and suffering? Or is this, this is a decision that once we make it, we can't, there's no going backwards. And that helps us then, the what we call two-way door decisions, those can be made much faster, right? Because we can back out of it. The one-way door decisions, they're the ones that, someone eventually has to step in and say, okay, this is the direction we're going. We're going this way. We can't back out of it, and we're going forward. But that's you got to have some way to vet the importance of that decision and the criticality of that decision.
I would add, I think another thing that can be really helpful in this scenario and just broadly around like experimentation and trying to drive new things forward is delegation, bluntly. Like, I think oftentimes when an idea is brought up, or again, I keep going back to like OKRs or lagging indicators, like we as leadership teams go in a room and talk about all these great ideas, but sometimes I can bring it to my team and say, who would like to go like tackle this and like operationalize addressing this thing we need to achieve? And they can come up with ideas well beyond what I or all of the leadership team had thought of, that might be just more because they're on the ground. They're talking to customers every day. They're talking to prospects every day. They're talking to partners every day. And what I often see when I delegate and really empower the team to own specific pieces or parts of a project is the naysayers are actually more vocal, and we actually identify more of the potential roadblocks or challenges, and we can get ahead of and proactively address them, versus leaders coming in and saying, okay, here's a project, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it, here's what everyone's role is. It tamps down that dialogue in some ways. And I try and create as a collaborative space as I can, but even still, like, I know when I say something, people are like, okay, that's what we're going to go do. And in their head, they're probably like, yeah, but this sounds like another, what if we just, and they're like, wait, but, right. And so I've really found that delegating that, especially to people who have expressed interest in future people management, expressed interest in leadership, expressed interest in driving projects, expressed interest in doing totally different jobs. Like, as you work with junior people, like they'll be in a role, like I think someone mentioned earlier, and 5 years later, they're like, I'm CS right now, but I really wish I was product, right? Well, great. Can you help with our next product launch? How should we manage that with customers best? Or we're working on a new product. Can you help with requirements gathering? How would you go about doing that? And our product team may have been doing it totally differently, but now we have someone with interest who's excited to pick that up and really drive totally new approach to things that can be super successful, while also gathering that feedback from peers saying, yeah, but if you send an email to every customer for feedback, everyone's going to want to give, like, how will you address volume, for example, right? Like if too many people raise their hand, what are we going to do? So it's a great opportunity for everyone to kind of dip their toe in different skills and really start building that foundation for their future as well.
So that leads right into the question around strengths-based leadership. How do you go about analyzing your team's strengths and then putting them in the best position to succeed? And how do you go about analyzing their changes and interests over time? Because we talked earlier about like what not only what are people good at, but also what gives them energy. And so, Marissa, you're describing a scenario which is really fascinating. You might have had a team member who was like really good at one thing and they really like doing it at one time, and then all of a sudden they're like, I'd love to try something else. And
Totally.
yeah, how do you go about getting to that point, and how do you go about analyzing that and one, understanding where their strengths lie and then putting them in the best position to succeed?
I can kick us off just because I brought up this topic. I think there's a lot of ways to do it. And I think that the method isn't as important as the like experience after. So of course there's like the strengths-based leadership, like actual test, right? There's like 42 strengths and woo and right achiever and all of those. That's great. If, at times HR teams are like, yeah, we're not going to spend like $300+ per person to take a test, and that's fine too. Myers-Briggs is a great like proxy in some ways. I don't think how you identify what your strengths are matters as much, though. I think the key things that I've seen work well is one, taking the job out of the conversation. It's not about the job, it's about the skills. What skills do you have that you thrive in and when you're using them? So again, whatever assessment you use for that to structure the conversation, I think can be flexible, especially if you go into the conversation and say, this is not perfect, right? Like, yes, it's scientifically backed, and also we're all our egos play a role. And so when you're asked 60 questions, you're going to fudge a couple of them and the results might not be exactly accurate, but it gives people some level of opportunity to really think about what skills they have. And that's the biggest thing, is carving out true time for your team to think as individuals. And if they're comfortable, come together and talk about those skills and ask each other, do you see this showing up? Where do you see me showing up with a lot of energy? Because maybe they didn't even recognize it in themselves. I've been very lucky to be able to facilitate some of these conversations with my team. And I found that doing it live can be extremely rewarding versus on Zoom. I'm a little bit old school and still like to be in real life from time to time. But really spending an afternoon just talking about strengths, reflecting individually, talking as a group, talking about what that looks like in their day to day can be so helpful for people to lean into and be confident about their skills and strengths and be okay saying, hey, that's probably not the right spot for me. Hey, that's probably not the right project for me to pick up, but I think it would help if I could do this portion of it. And being okay talking about that even with each other so that we can all be super collaborative and move as quickly as possible.
I would like to add to that. I love doing those things in person as well. And what I really like to see, like, which just warms my heart, is when someone's like, I'm not exactly sure the value I add. And then all their teammates come and they're like, oh, you're great at this. You always help me with this. So I find it to be like, not only is it useful for me as a leader to learn, it really helps build up the team and the team spirit where they're all giving each other really positive and sometimes critical too feedback in a group setting. It's
Sure.
amazing.
That's a really cool story and a really cool point. And Marissa, it's almost like what you're describing. I'm trying to think of like a real life example. Like if let's say you're leading customer success and you maybe have the majority of team very extroverted, likes talking with people on the phone, handling incoming inquiries and that sort of stuff. But maybe you've got a team member who's like, I'm really technically savvy, and I like organizing things. Maybe they're like, instead of me being on the phones handling customer inquiries, maybe I could try to develop an AI system that can listen to what the customer is talking about and be able to immediately query to the team member how to handle that complaint or how to handle that situation. So then that agent or person who's working with the client can immediately hearken to that and be like, okay, cool, here's how we can handle the situation and do it in real time versus like needing to take the however many minutes to figure out what the protocol is for whatever scenario.
For sure.
That's cool. No, I love it. I think this is really interesting. We've talked a lot about like how to empower people and that are interested in the strategic and taking on the next level. I just wanted to quickly touch on how do we go about getting people to think more strategically when they're maybe they're being a little too tactical. Maybe they're in a scenario where like, hey boss, did what you asked me to do. What's next? How do you go about keeping people invigorated as to just like, hey, like I need you to infer what the next step is based on the priorities we've laid out and the goals that we're working towards?
I think I can't remember if Elizabeth or Marissa mentioned earlier, but being able to give them ownership, right? The person has to have ownership for something. It may be relatively small, it may be huge, depending, in terms of strategy. But they own it. And I think when they own it, they're going to figure out a way to solve the problem. They're going to talk to their peers and teammates, maybe people from another team to figure it out. But you really do need to empower them to make the decision because they have to, in our case, write that section of the operating plan, right? And it's going to be scrutinized. It's going to get a lot of eyes on it. So they have to, it forces them to be creative. It forces them to make sure that their position's well-founded. We require each other to raise the bar every day, right? That's just kind of one of our initiatives here as an organization is always raising the bar, always doing better today what you did than you did yesterday. Same with sports analogy, right? We're in third place. How can we get to first place? We have to make some changes. First half of the season went pretty good, but this is where we're lacking. Here are the metrics that show where we're lacking. So what can we change to make things better? But the empowerment is a critical part of it, because my belief is empowerment drives motivation, drives creativity, and there's never, you always say it's never a bad answer. There isn't. You have to make sure you put something behind it so you're not embarrassed when you provide that answer. But it's empowerment's key.
Yeah, I'd also add that I really see curiosity being so critical here. As a leader, being really curious with your team. Again, I'll mention it again, but being virtual makes all of this 10 times more difficult as leaders at times, because when you do have that individual on your team that's super tactical and getting very caught up in the tactical work, they are doing that for some reason, right? Like, I trust my team, and I trust we're all adults. We're all doing things for very specific reasons. So why are you working on that tactical thing? What is driving that behavior? Why are you making the decision to show up and get back into the weeds instead of the other things that we had discussed at the team meeting or the quarterly goal or whatever that was? To understand, because again, that's good feedback. Either I didn't communicate that well enough to explicitly explain what was expected, or maybe they're actually doing the right work and I didn't recognize the value of that tactical work in the way that they've been, working on it, addressing it, trying to achieve it. And so being open and curious, asking a lot of questions to understand why they're focused there is really helpful. And then course correcting is often helpful by empowering and really asking them, like, okay, heard, still don't really think that's the right space to be working on. Where else can we focus your energies? Where do you think you could be focused elsewhere? Let's look at your calendar. This is a super tactical piece of advice, but asking your team to block time on their calendar to do the work that makes them uncomfortable is a very good forcing function to help them get more comfortable doing it. So maybe you have that CSM who doesn't like to pick up the phone, and they just like live in support cases and research and like, well, I think that the customer might want to put that an hour on their day every day to make calls to customers. Over time, they'll start getting more comfortable on the phone. And so really helping them kind of get there themselves, that change management, that empowerment will really help them, I think, get to that next level in a way that helps them be like confident and comfortable in that kind of evolution.
Yeah, I love it. I think that curiosity is key. I just think the big challenge that a lot of leaders struggle with practicing curiosity is everything else that's on their plate and all the other constraints that seem are to be more important than curiosity, but truly aren't. Curiosity, I think, is the most important element, especially when it comes to empowering your team, because you can only get so much done by yourself. Your team can get way more done as a group together. But what I often find is it's a lot easier to judge people on your perception of them than on your understanding of their intentions. And it's easier just to say, oh, well, this person's just stupid or lazy or just doesn't care, or I'm going to need to put them on a PIP, versus like, hey, why are you like, I'd be curious to know what's going on. Like, what about picking up the phone and chatting with customers are you apprehensive about? And, how can we go about practicing this skill set and developing this ability? And I think, Marissa, you bring up a great point. I think it's really on the leader, almost like, at the same time, the key behaviors they want to see in the team, they need to practice in themselves, that being curiosity. And I think that's a really good point. So this has been a really great pre-symposium panel. I feel like we've covered a lot of really good topics here in our conversation today. Elizabeth, Greg, and Marissa, thanks for being here. And if you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, great, I would love to meet these great leaders, come to the Executive Symposium on August 15th in Austin, Texas. I'll post the link on how to RSVP in the chat. But everybody, thanks for your time. Thanks for being here. Have a wonderful